If you think you've heard shocking stories, wait until you hear mine. I was a priest, respected and revered in my small, God fearing community. My purpose was clear: to serve the Lord and guide my flock. But all of that unraveled the moment I laid eyes on him. His name was Lucas, blonde hair like gold, eyes as blue as the sky after a storm, and a presence that disturbed every vow I had made. He was only 19, a devoted churchgoer, and everything I wasn't supposed to want. Yet, against all logic, I did. It began innocently enough, or so I told myself. A glance here, a lingering look there. But desire has a way of growing like a fire, consuming everything in its path. Before I knew it, my thoughts, my prayers, and my very soul were centered on Lucas. This story isn't just about forbidden love. It's about obsession, betrayal, and the chaos that ensued when our secret became the town's darkest scandal. Lucas first caught my attention during Sunday Mass. He always sat in the second row, head bowed reverently during prayers, his lips moving softly as he recited the hymns. At first, I admired his devotion, but as weeks passed, I found myself drawn to him for reasons I couldn't explain, or perhaps refused to admit. Every time I delivered a sermon, his eyes met mine. They weren't just attentive. They were piercing, as if he saw right through the collar, right through the priest, and into the man beneath. It unsettled me. After services, I would catch him lingering near the altar, his gaze lingering just a moment too long before he walked away. At night, I prayed fervently, asking God to take away the sinful thoughts. But even in prayer, his face would appear, haunting me. I avoided him when I could, but Lucas always found a way to be present, whether it was staying late after Mass or volunteering for church events. One evening, as I locked up the church, I saw him waiting outside, sitting on the steps as if lost in thought. When he looked up and smiled, my chest tightened. "Beautiful evening, isn't it, Father?" he said, his voice soft and warm. I mumbled a response, hurrying inside, but that smile stayed with me. I told myself it was nothing. I was overreacting, letting my imagination get the better of me. Yet, deep down, I knew this was no ordinary connection. And the more I tried to suppress it, the stronger it grew. It was late on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind of day where the church seemed to breathe peace and solitude. The congregation had filtered out after Mass, their voices fading into the gentle hum of the outside world. I was alone, tidying the altar and preparing to lock up for the evening, when I noticed him. Lucas? He was still there, sitting in the second pew, his hands clasped together in what seemed to be deep prayer. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass bathed him in a kaleidoscope of colors, giving him an almost ethereal glow. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to leave him be, to walk away. But something, curiosity perhaps, or a dangerous pull I couldn't name, compelled me to approach. "Lucas," I said softly, my voice echoing in the vastness of the empty church. "Is everything all right?" He looked up, startled, and for a moment his face was a mixture of surprise and something deeper, something vulnerable. "Yes, Father," he replied, his voice calm but tinged with an edge of hesitation. "I just like being here when it's quiet. It feels different." His words struck a chord within me, though I didn't understand why. "The church can be a sanctuary," I said, sitting down a few feet away from him, "a place of peace." He turned his gaze toward me, and I felt pinned under the weight of those piercing blue eyes. "Do you feel peace here, Father?" he asked, his tone both innocent and searching. It was a simple question, yet it cut deeper than any theological debate I had ever engaged in. Did I feel peace? Or was I finding something else entirely, something forbidden? I hesitated before answering, buying myself time. I find solace in serving God, I said finally, though even as the words left my lips, they felt hollow. The truth was, peace had been elusive for me lately, replaced by a growing unease that I couldn't shake. And now, sitting so close to Lucas, that unease was magnified tenfold. He didn't seem satisfied with my answer. I think peace is different for everyone, he mused, his voice thoughtful. For me, it's about feeling understood, feeling like I belong. His honesty disarmed me. I had spent years counseling others, guiding them through their struggles, but in that moment, I felt like the one being counseled. That's a profound thought, I admitted, my voice softer now. Belonging is something we all crave in one way or another. There was a brief silence between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then he spoke again, his tone more tentative this time. Do you ever feel lost, Father? Like you're not sure if you're where you're supposed to be? The question took me by surprise. As a priest, I was supposed to be a beacon of certainty, a guide for those who were lost. But Lucas's words hit too close to home. Sometimes, I admitted, the confession slipping out before I could stop it. Even those who lead others can feel adrift. He nodded as if he understood, and the expression on his face, empathetic, almost tender, made my chest tighten. This wasn't just a casual conversation. It was something deeper, something dangerous. I should have ended it there, should have stood up and walked away. But instead, I stayed, drawn to him in a way I couldn't explain. I've been coming here a lot lately, he said after a moment, his gaze dropping to his hands. Not just for the sermons, but because I feel like I can talk to you, like you'd understand. His words sent a jolt through me. Was it admiration? Trust? Something more? I didn't know, but the way he spoke, the way he looked at me, was unlike anything I'd experienced before. Lucas, I began, choosing my words carefully. You can always talk to me. That's what I'm here for. He smiled then, a small, genuine smile that lit up his face. Thank you, Father, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. That means a lot. I nodded, trying to keep my composure, but inside, I was anything but composed. This was more than a pastoral moment. It was a connection, one that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. As I watched him stand and make his way to the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental had just shifted between us. I stayed in the pew long after he left, staring at the altar, but seeing only his face. This wasn't supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to feel this way. And yet, no matter how much I tried to fight it, I knew this was only the beginning. The days after that conversation were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Lucas's words lingered in my mind, his voice playing over and over like a melody I couldn't forget. I tried to immerse myself in my duties, burying the burgeoning feelings under layers of sermons and prayers, but it was futile. Every time I stepped into the church, I half expected to see him, and when he wasn't there, I felt an ache I couldn't explain. Then, one afternoon, he returned. It was a weekday, and the church was empty save for the flickering candles and the faint smell of incense lingering from morning prayers. I was in the sacristy when I heard footsteps. My heart leaped, a mix of anticipation and dread coursing through me. Father Gabriel? His voice called softly, echoing off the stone walls. I stepped out, trying to appear composed. "Lucas," I said, my tone measured. "What brings you here?" He smiled sheepishly, running a hand through his golden hair. I was nearby and thought I'd stop in. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Of course not," I replied, though the tension in my chest betrayed my calm exterior. "The church is always open." He lingered by the altar, his fingers grazing the edge as if lost in thought. "It's so quiet here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Peaceful." I nodded, unsure of what to say. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, he turned to face me, his eyes locking onto mine. "Father, can I ask you something?" "Anything," I replied, though my voice wavered slightly. He took a step closer, his expression hesitant yet resolute. "Do you ever feel like you're fighting something you can't control? Like no matter how much you pray or try to resist, it just keeps pulling you in?" The question hit me like a blow. I stared at him, my mind racing. Did he know? Could he see the struggle etched on my face? "Lucas, everyone faces battles," I said carefully. "It's part of being human. But what if the battle feels different?" He pressed, his voice trembling slightly. "What if it's something you're not supposed to feel?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I took a step toward him, drawn by some invisible force. "Lucas, are you—" Before I could finish, his hand brushed against mine. It was a fleeting touch, light as a feather, but it sent a jolt through my entire body. I froze, every muscle tensing as our eyes met. His were wide, filled with a mixture of fear and something deeper, something I recognized all too well. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, pulling his hand back. "I didn't mean—" "No," I interrupted, my voice softer than I intended. "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. That single touch had crossed an invisible line, shattering the fragile barrier I had tried so hard to maintain. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. His touch, his words, the way he looked at me, it was all-consuming. I paced the sacristy, my thoughts a storm of guilt and longing. I knew I should call him, ask him to stop coming to the church, but the mere thought of cutting him out of my life felt unbearable. The next day, he returned. This time, there was no pretense of casual conversation. "Father, can we talk?" he asked, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his nerves. We sat in the pews, the flickering candles casting shadows on the walls. "Lucas, what's on your mind?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He hesitated, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "I feel like there's something I need to say, but I'm scared." "You don't have to be afraid," I assured him, though my own heart was racing. He took a deep breath, then met my gaze. "I think about you, Father, all the time, and I know it's wrong, but I can't stop." His confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I should have rebuked him, reminded him of my vows, of the sacredness of my role. But instead, I found myself saying, "You're not alone in that, Lucas." The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. That evening, as the world outside fell into darkness, we sat in the sacristy, speaking in hushed tones. The tension between us was palpable, every glance and word charged with an energy neither of us could deny. It happened so quickly, yet it felt like time stood still. One moment we were sitting inches apart, and the next, his lips brushed against mine. It was tentative, almost hesitant, but it was enough to shatter the dam that had held back my emotions. When we pulled apart, The weight of what we had done hit us both. "Lucas," I began, my voice trembling, "this is wrong." "Then why does it feel so right?" he countered, his eyes searching mine for answers. I didn't have any. All I knew was that in that moment, I had given in to a desire I had tried so hard to suppress. And as much as I wanted to deny it, I knew this was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. Our relationship was a fragile flame, flickering in the shadows of secrecy. By day, I was Father Gabriel, a man of faith and a guide to my flock. By night, in the quiet corners of the church or under the cover of darkness, I was just Gabriel, a man who had surrendered to a forbidden love. Every moment with Lucas felt like both a blessing and a curse, an intoxicating escape from the rigid confines of my vows, but also a constant reminder of the immense risk we were taking. We met in secret, our rendezvous cloaked in the mundane to avoid suspicion. Lucas would linger after Mass, helping with chores or pretending to seek guidance. And we'd steal fleeting moments together, a brush of hands while arranging hymnals, whispered words in the empty sacristy, longing looks exchanged across the pews. These small gestures were electric, their intensity heightened by the constant fear of being caught. But it wasn't enough. As the days turned into weeks, our stolen moments grew bolder. One evening, after everyone had left, he stayed behind, waiting for me by the altar. The church was dimly lit, the only light coming from the flickering candles. His presence was magnetic, pulling me toward him despite the voice in my head screaming for restraint. "I couldn't wait until Sunday," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I needed to see you." I hesitated, glancing around the empty church as if the walls themselves might betray us. "Lucas, this is dangerous. We can't—" "Then tell me you don't feel the same," he interrupted, stepping closer. "Tell me you don't think about me as much as I think about you." I couldn't lie. "I do," I confessed, my voice breaking. "But what we're doing, it's wrong." "Is it?" he asked, his blue eyes locking onto mine. "Or is it only wrong because people tell us it is?" His words stirred something within me, a rebellious flicker of defiance against the chains of my vocation. Before I could respond, he reached for my hand, intertwining his fingers with mine. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver down my spine, and for a moment, all the guilt and fear melted away, replaced by a deep, aching need. Our secret grew deeper, our moments together more intense. We found sanctuary in the hidden corners of the church, where the stone walls and stained glass seemed to shield us from the world's judgment. Each meeting was a delicate dance of desire and restraint, the weight of our actions pressing down on us even as we sought solace in each other. One night, as rain poured outside, we met in the small chapel at the back of the church. The storm drowned out the world, creating a cocoon of intimacy that felt almost sacred. Lucas sat beside me on the bench, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. "I don't regret this," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "No matter what happens, I don't regret loving you." His words took my breath away. "You shouldn't have to bear the consequences of this," I said, my voice heavy with guilt. "I'm the one who should know better." "But I'm the one who pursued you," he argued, his hand brushing against mine. "I made my choice, and I'd make it again." I turned to him, my heart aching with a mix of love and despair. "Lucas, you're so young. You have your whole life ahead of you. I don't want to ruin that." "You're not ruining anything," he insisted, his voice firm. You've shown me what it means to feel alive. Our connection deepened, the bond between us growing stronger with every stolen moment. But the closer we became, the harder it was to hide. The town was small, its people nosy and observant. Whispers began to circulate. Nothing concrete, just the faintest hints of suspicion. I tried to be cautious, to put distance between us, but Lucas's presence was like gravity, pulling me back no matter how hard I tried to resist. One evening, as we sat in the sacristy, Lucas reached for my hand. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "Whatever happens, we'll get through it together." I wanted to believe him, but the weight of reality loomed over us. "It's not that simple," I said, my voice tinged with defeat. "If anyone finds out—" "They won't," he interrupted, his grip on my hand tightening. "We'll be careful." But no matter how careful we were, the risks were impossible to ignore. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word felt like a gamble, the stakes growing higher with each passing day. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to let him go. The turning point came during one of our late-night meetings. We were in the rectory, the room dimly lit by a single lamp. Lucas sat across from me, his expression a mix of frustration and longing. "I hate this," he admitted, his voice raw with emotion. "Hiding, pretending, it's exhausting." "I know," I said, my own voice heavy with weariness. "But it's the only way." "It doesn't have to be," he argued, his eyes flashing with defiance. "We could leave, start over somewhere else where no one knows us." The idea was both tempting and terrifying. "And what would we do?" I asked, my tone tinged with skepticism. "Run away and live in secret forever?" "If it means being with you, then yes," he said without hesitation. His words filled me with both hope and dread. The thought of leaving everything behind, my position, my faith, my community, was unthinkable. But the thought of losing Lucas was even worse. The storm we had been avoiding was coming, and deep down, I knew it. Our love was a fragile thing, beautiful but unsustainable, destined to crumble under the weight of its own impossibility. But in those stolen moments, I chose to believe in the fantasy, to hold on to the fleeting joy Lucas brought into my life. As we sat together in the dimly lit room, I reached for his hand, intertwining my fingers with his. "No matter what happens," I said softly, "you need to promise me one thing." "Anything," he replied, his voice steady. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself," I said, my throat tightening, "even if I'm not there." His eyes filled with emotion, and he leaned closer, his lips brushing against mine in a tender, lingering kiss. "I promise," he whispered. In that moment, we were just two people, stripped of titles and expectations, clinging to a love that felt as fragile as it was forbidden. But the storm was coming, and neither of us could stop it. The town erupted like a volcano. Lucas's father barged into the church after Mass, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You corrupted my son," he bellowed. Gasps rippled through the congregation as all eyes turned toward me. Lucas appeared at the door, his face pale but determined. "Stop this," he shouted, his voice cracking. His father ignored him, calling me a predator, a disgrace. The congregation turned into a mob, their whispers now shouts. I could see the trust in their eyes dissolve into hatred. I had no words to defend myself. The truth was out. Chapter 8. The fallout by nightfall. Everyone knew. The diocese suspended me. My phone was flooded with angry messages. Lucas was whisked away to a retreat, his family desperate to save him. I was left alone in the rectory, my once safe haven now suffocating. Graffiti on the church walls labeled me a monster. People spat at me on the street. I tried to write to Lucas, but his family intercepted every attempt. The silence from him was unbearable. I had lost everything: my vocation, my community, and the one person I cared for most. The town's silence was deafening as I walked through the dark streets one last time. I carried a single bag, leaving behind the life I had built and the love that had unraveled it all. The church, once my sanctuary, now loomed like a ghost, its stained glass windows casting faint, judgmental colors onto the ground. At the bus station, I bought a one-way ticket to the farthest destination I could afford. The clerk didn't meet my eyes, but I felt the weight of his knowledge. Everyone in town knew. I boarded the bus, the engine humming beneath me as I sank into a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away, I glanced back, the steeple of the church disappearing into the distance. My chest tightened at the thought of Lucas, his voice, his touch, the way he made me feel alive in a way I'd never experienced. I wondered where he was, what they were telling him, and if he still thought of me. Each mile carried me further from the life I once knew, but not from the guilt that clung to me like a shadow. I had failed my vows, my faith, and the trust of those who had once believed in me. But worse, I had failed Lucas by dragging him into a storm he didn't deserve. As the bus sped through the night, I questioned if leaving was truly the solution, or just another act of cowardice. Love can be the most powerful force, yet the most destructive when it defies boundaries meant to protect. Lucas showed me a version of myself I didn't know existed. A man capable of passion, vulnerability, and mistakes. But in choosing him, I sacrificed everything else. This isn't a story of redemption or forgiveness. It's a story of choices and consequences of what happens when we let our hearts lead us into forbidden places. For Lucas, I hope the retreat brings him peace and clarity. For me, I may never find either, but I'll carry the memory of our love and the lessons it taught me wherever this uncertain road takes me. Hey, what did you think of this story? On a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate it? Drop your score in the comments below and let me know what you thought of the ending. Did it surprise you or leave you wanting more? If you have your own story, real or fictional, that you think deserves to be told, share it in the comments. We'd love to turn it into a video for everyone to enjoy. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that pushes boundaries and stirs emotions. Let's keep the conversation going.